One of the best things about this series that we offer is that I have a chance to invite all my friends to come meet you and share with you. And I'm delighted to share with you one of my dear friends, Keith Oglesby. I've known Keith for years, and the funny thing about us clergy types is we don't often get to hear each other preach or teach or do anything of that nature. We get together for learning sometimes, or for social events, or worshiping together, but we don't get to hear our colleagues preach. So I'm looking forward to this. And actually, it's a little bit of a wild card because I'm not really sure what you have to offer is any good. But anyway, teasing, of course. Keith is wonderful, and I'm thankful that he's here. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia, was educated here in Georgia, went to seminary at Candler School of Theology after a time in the business world, and has served at the St. Aidan's Church in Alpharetta as an associate, and now for almost 10 years at the Church of the Holy Spirit in Cumming, Georgia. So welcome, Keith. We're delighted you're here.
Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. O my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed. Let not mine enemies triumph over me. Good afternoon. Like Tim said, I am an old friend of his, and I'm so glad that he took time to invite me and the other speakers so far to be part of this series. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and I just think it's a great idea. I was talking to Barbara briefly, and it's something apparently you've done for a long time. So I'm glad just to be a part of it. Also, I do have some connection here besides through Father Tim. Dick Game is probably my closest friend, one of my closest friends for sure. I know he was curate here for a few years before moving on to his parish in Dunwoody. So I've heard stories from him, and he always has nothing but good things to say about Trinity and Columbus. What I want to do, though, is to hopefully build on what you've heard already from Don and Alicia, and from Nick, and from Sandra, some of the saints of the church, some wonderful leaders, some people who I know from the little bit I've seen on the internet have shared some good thoughts so far. Like Sandra said last week, it's a little daunting being the fifth person talking about the same basic theme, though, like Tim said last week, no one really follows the theme too closely. So hopefully what I'm doing won't overlap, but it'll complement what has come so far. And simply what I want to do with you for the time we have together is to reflect on the Psalms as a way to explore and connect our emotions, what we call our heart, how to explore and connect those with our faith so that we can live it with integrity in our lives. So to begin, what are you feeling in your gut right now? Full? You may be thinking or feeling, I hope this guy doesn't call on me. But what we feel when we take the time to be honest with ourselves and with God is often what we find in the Psalms. As you read through them, what you'll often find are these gut-level cries to God. Sometimes they're complaints, sometimes they're confessions, they're sorrow expressed, trust, joy. Almost any emotion that we can identify are found in the Psalms. Now, for some of us, I assume we've known that for years. We've read the Psalms, we've experienced that emotion. Some of us have probably never thought about it much. But assuming what I'm saying is accurate, how do we respond to the Psalms? How do we use them as part of our faith? Because for some of us, frankly, it might feel awkward. It might make us uncomfortable. Like, why are all those emotions there? You may just want the Bible to say, here's what you're supposed to do, go do it. That may feel more comfortable for us. Others of us, though, that when we read the Psalms and talk about them with others, we may feel a sense of relief that other people have felt like we do, even people thousands of years ago. They share their emotions out loud in ways that were recorded and kept in the Bible. They're even in the prayer book. So there's something that is validating, that how we feel and maybe are afraid to bring into church is already there as we read the Psalms. Now, personally, I tend to be a person who lives in my head. And that's not uncommon for a lot of clergy. I'm actually, as I've gotten older and gone through some therapy, I realize I'm a more emotional person. But maybe like some of you, through a combination of my family upbringing, my culture, and frankly, my sense of what's right and wrong, it has tended to make me skeptical about emotions. So as part of my spiritual life for years, trying to manage my emotions was a big part of what I thought was the right thing to do spiritually. And there might be some of you who can relate to that as well. In general, though, what I've found in my pastoral ministry and just in life, that there are two types of folks in general. Obviously, there are more, but in general, some of us have ready access to our emotions. I mean, we just know what's inside of us. We can express it. Some of the great poets and musicians and artists have that access in a way that we know what they say, how they behave is congruent with who they are, people in whom there's no guile. But again, for other folks, maybe more like me, we have a difficult time with emotion. Again, it could be personality or upbringing or context, but there's that tendency to kind of repress what we feel. We may have even learned that being real or being honest about our emotions can cause problems in our family of origin or in our marriage, even in church. So if that's a thing, how do we learn to live with our emotions in a way that's healthy? And especially in the context of the Psalms, how do we explore what I would say is this diamond mine of emotions and passion that we find there? Well, one approach is just to ignore the Psalms. Don't really have to pay attention. Even if we come to church, we can check out, look at the bulletin, do something else when the Psalms are being read or chanted. Or we can try to domesticate them, tame them, think of them as churchy words that we say or chant together, but perhaps not go too much deeper than that. Think of them as ancient poetry that we can kind of leave in the church building. But another approach, which I would recommend, is to take the Psalms with us into our lives, into our hearts, and use them or have them help us engage all the emotions we experience in life, to explore them, all the things that we go through in our daily lives. So the Psalms can be this way to connect with God and with one another, to do that in a way that brings us more fully into a life of faith and integrity. And even if we're already emotional, we have a good access, we know how to express ourselves, the Psalms give us a type of structure that we can live into, that can help to guide us in how we live our life of faith. We can again say, "That's me," and then pray a psalm that connects with us over time in a way that helps us to go more deeply into what we're experiencing in life. And again, for those of us who are more detached, who have a harder time expressing emotion, those psalms can be a light that help us to explore them. We can read the psalm slowly and prayerfully, whether alone or in community, and see what bubbles up from inside of us in a way that can change us over time, so that we know that emotions are a healthy and rich part of life. Now, the Psalms are a big book. It's the largest book in the Bible. And you may have looked in a Bible before and seen sections that say, if you're feeling sad, read this psalm. Or if you're feeling happy, read this psalm. And that's in part what I'm saying. Our Old Testament professor at seminary used to say that the Psalms may have been used in the temple, that if you came to see the temple priest and you were upset, you were sad, or whatever, that the priest may have said, well, go read Psalm 40 through the night, come see me in the morning. Almost like a prescription in the ancient times. And again, that may be one way for us to access the Psalms or think about the Psalms in our life today. So what I want to do is go through 3 different sections in the Psalm that we're supposed to cover and think about that and our emotional life. This psalm, as I think Sandra said last week, is what's called a penitential psalm. So the emotions we find, they're going to have a theme around how do we repent? How do we return to God when something has gone wrong in our lives? And the very first verses, what I said at the very beginning, deal with one of the most powerful emotions in life. It's shame or humiliation. I won't ask for a raising of hands, but I know at least some of us, and probably all of us, have felt ashamed at one time or another. Partly because it's something that goes back early in our childhood. It is something that happens often in families of origin with parenting. Parents might use that to punish children. And then through childhood too, with friends growing up, they might tease us, make us feel ashamed, especially if we've done something that makes us kind of stick out. Coaches and teachers might use that to motivate us. And then bosses later in life can do the same. So shame is this thing that kind of resides inside of us, sometimes used on us, sometimes something we use, something that has a power over us. And of course, historically, we've used shaming at different times to oppress other people. Segregation was a way of publicly shaming, thankfully changed. So Psalm 25 identifies that very real emotion in a cry to God. I lift up my soul to you. I trust in you. Let me not be humiliated. So you can feel that emotion. It's a power, something I would call honest prayer, something from the heart. Something has happened in the psalmist's fate in his life that he is afraid of. He's afraid someone will do something to him that will lower him or disempower him in front of others, and it terrifies him. These aren't just words he's saying in church. So in our lives, a way to incorporate that is to know that's there as a resource when we're feeling that same emotion. Some of us, perhaps even right now. And if we are feeling this shame, understand the psalmist gets that. He understands us. And the psalm can be a companion for us when we're threatened by that sense of humiliation or the threat of it. Again, it won't magically solve everything, but it'll help us to know that someone has been there with us and has been able to turn to God and shows us the way to turn as well. The psalmist has another emotion later in the same psalm that again may connect with us, which is guilt. It's one reason it's a penitential psalm. He writes, "Remember not the sins of my youth. Instead, remember me according to your love, O Lord." Again, that connection with God that takes a starting place of how you feel, that depth, what we're struggling with. For each of us, it might be different. It might be a memory from when we're youths or a young adult, a young parent or a spouse, but something that haunts us, the guilt that stays with us. And that starting point from the psalm is admitting it and asking God not to hold it against us, but instead to express our sorrow and seek God's love and goodness. And that getting real with our emotional life is a starting point for a new beginning. To help us move from being stuck to taking steps to make things right as needed and to amend our lives. Reading a psalm is not magic, but it can be one part of our healing process when we're stuck in guilt. And later, the last portion I'll talk about in Psalm 25 is the emotion of sorrow. "Turn to me and have pity on me, for I am left alone and in misery. The sorrows of my heart have increased. Bring me out of my troubles. Look upon my adversity and misery and forgive me all my sin." Sorrow, again, is this rich part of life. And so much of our cultural messaging is not to be that way, to be distracted, to be entertained, to stay positive, to just get over it, to move on. That's not usually how sorrow works. Again, these verses from this portion of the Psalms help us know it's okay to express that, to own that, and that that's even needed as part of a healthy life. Because when we deny our sorrow, our sadness, when we push it down, it causes damage, not only for us, but sometimes for those around us who need us to be engaged with them in grief. And it can cause us to act out in some unhealthy ways, whatever they may be for us around addiction or other things that take the pain away, the sorrow away, but it's still deep inside. So that's just a few verses in one psalm, one way to navigate how we get through life when we're feeling things that are hard to express. And there are 149 more. So there are a lot of psalms that we can use as part of our regular life of exploring emotions and what we feel and what's going on inside of us. And when we use the Psalms this way to access our emotions and God's grace, over time, it can be part of what changes us. Over time, as we pray the Psalms, we read them, we use them to cry out to God, they kind of seep into our soul, into our lives. And over time, they can undermine these well-guarded defenses that many of us have erected, that sometimes get in the way of our spiritual and emotional growth. Psalms give us a language that helps us to bring a tenderness to our hearts, to change how we love. Starting with ourselves first, despite what we might find in ourselves that we don't like, our failures or inadequacies or limitations. And Psalms can be one way to help us learn how to love people close to us, parents and siblings and spouses and children, because it helps us to learn how to be real, to be honest, to connect more fully from one heart to another, even with the stranger that we encounter in our lives. Now, the Psalms can do other things that might be surprising. And I'm going to wait on that and look at the photo behind me. I'm not sure where you got it. It may have been a spread off the Facebook page. But what's neat about that photo is it's a visual, like an icon of what I'm talking about. I was on a mission trip to Honduras. And in Honduras, has anyone ever gone on a mission trip? What you do, at least what I do, is on that particular trip, you meet with a missionary. I was kind of helping them do a retreat with some of their volunteers. We were like doing fences. Usually you paint, but I was doing wire fence repair. And I felt good about it because you're busy, you're doing stuff, you're doing, some spiritual work. But what the missionary told me to do is after the little kids have their papaya, they want to play. And she said, and the best thing to do is get down on the floor. And it's not work, it's not in your head, it's not anything that priests do. And that's the photo, at least one of them. And it's a delightful little photo. So these kids, kind of like puppies, overwhelmed me once I got on the floor and knocked me down, literally. But you can just see that love, that kids are kind of in that stage of life with emotions where they haven't quite gotten all the conditioning. So there's a pure joy. One hit me, one hit another, but it's just that playful part of life. Emotions are there if we access them. And some of you know this well. Now, Psalms can also get into tricky areas in our lives. Things that I talk about as principled positions. We know what's right and we stand by what we believe. And of course that's good in many ways. But just to pick one that I know can be controversial is around the death penalty. In our staff meetings, I had an associate before who, by the name of Kathy Zappa, you may have heard of her at the cathedral, and she did a lot of work at the women's prison, including working with a woman named Kelly Gissendaner, who many of you have probably heard her story. And in our staff meeting that day, one of us said something about the death penalty being really important or just necessary. And she got very upset. She was very emotional because for her it wasn't a matter of principle, it was her friend. And if you talk to her, not to put words in her mouth, but she knows there's complexity, there's the victims, there's the justice system, it's a complex issue. But for her, it was a relationship. And that's one way that emotions can help us check our principled positions. Because if we don't check them with human emotion, they can be very rigid and lack compassion. So there's a verse in the Psalms, not in the one for today, Psalm 79, that says, "Let the sorrowful sighing of the prisoners come before you, and by your great might spare those who are condemned to die." That's a short little verse. I don't think you can build a systemic view of the death penalty from that one verse, but it gives you a window into emotion, what people experience. And I won't go into the depth of Kelly's particular case, but I know for at least some people on death row, well, it begins first, let me say, with the victim and the victim's family and the emotions, the anguish, the pain that they feel. But at least with some of the prisoners, there's also an experience that is based on emotion. And in the best sense, what we can imagine them feeling is that guilt of what they've done, that sense of being lost, how they can cry out to God seeking peace and can find it, That's part of that cry to God. And then the complexity of all the systemic things that happen. But at the core, there's this root human need of restoration. Something that needs to change so that people who have done wrong have a way forward without forgetting what they've done wrong and being punished. But that emotion of someone who is going to be walked down from one cell to be executed with no way out. That fear. So that's just an example. If you have a firmly held position about a social issue, a legal issue, a political issue, what I would invite all of us to do, I try to do this, is to get deeper than what you think is right and understand an emotion that the other people involved are experiencing. You can think of it as almost a check that reason and principles are important, but they're not enough. They need to form a partnership with those deeper issues in our soul. Frederick Buechner said it this way, that justice is the grammar of things, and that mercy is the poetry of things. So, as we grow in faith, as we explore our emotions, as the Psalms help us, we can get deeper than right and wrong, and defensiveness and judging. Not to ignore what's right, but to get deeper, to get underneath those issues. And again, the Psalms can help us to do that. As we go deeper, that is where we find God, where we experience God's love, because God is waiting for us in the depths of our life. God is not a heavenly accountant who's keeping track of the things we do at some superficial level. God understands us more than we understand ourselves, and definitely more than we understand other people. So again, I think this is a wonderful practice you've done. I'd like to give homework. I know I'm not the rector, so you can definitely ignore it. I know you would never be ignored, but some homework. Pray for grace in these last few days of Lent to get in touch with our hearts, with our emotions, to own them and not be ashamed of them, to bring them into the light, and to use the Psalms as a way to do that. So there's some practical steps you can do. You can consider therapy or a support group, because I found that's a helpful way to get deeper. As important as church is, therapy can help us even if we don't have a mental illness per se, but can help us step into things that we need to explore. Spiritual direction is another way that is open to us, or retreats. And not necessarily an either-or with therapy, but a way to approach issues using the tools of our faith, prayer and scripture and reflection. There's also a little tool you may have seen before called an emotion wheel. We use it in different training and groups, but if you can get one, what emotion are you feeling? Some of you may be pros at this, but some of us may benefit from using that. And then to use the Psalms. You can do it in one way where it's more around quantity. You can read through the Psalms for the lectionary. You can read through the Psalms for the daily office. There's even a way, in the way it's organized in the prayer book, to read all the Psalms in a month. That may sound daunting, but there are ways of just getting through them to explore the contours of the Psalms. Or again, you can do quality. Quality is where you take one psalm or even a verse of a psalm and go deeper, like what you've done these last 5 weeks now with Psalm 25. Howard Thurman, a great theologian of the last century, would read Psalm 139 every day. Where can I go from your Spirit? That God is with us. It's a psalm that I've often read with folks as they're nearing the end of their lives. It goes to explore all these emotions of life. But those are just some ideas. Whatever you find helpful is what will be best for you. And I hope some of what I say today has been a blessing. I'm glad I've been able to be with you. And I look forward to hopefully being with you again in the future. God bless you.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you for being here. Remember, there may be some takeaway soup and sandwiches that you can check with the kitchen as you leave. And remember, Holy Week is just around the corner, and I hope to see you here sometime between Sundays during Holy Week. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.